Food. A vital resource that is extremely valued, yet still extremely overlooked. In the past, food was only viewed as a means of survival. Over the years, however, it has advanced to become so much more. Food is now utilized as a tool of sorts. While commonly known as an essential to a positive physical health, food additionally has a major impact on one's emotional health and can be used as an efficient method of completely altering one's thoughts, feelings, and actions. Once humans discovered this tidbit of information, they used it to their advantage, often conducting important events surrounding food for a more likely chance at reaching their desired goal. These events bring people together and create a more diplomatic environment for everyone. Whether it's a presidential negotiation over a meal or it's the cultural promotion of regional cuisine, food often plays a major role in diplomacy. Why does food have this effect exactly? It's simple. Psychologically, human brains are drawn to food. Humans need nourishment to survive, and the prime source of valuable nutrients is consumable food. However, to help the human species understand this, a motivator to eat must be present. Therefore, dopamine, a neurotransmitter that causes feelings of happiness, is released upon food consumption. This helps humans feel positively reinforced when they eat, which will lead to them engaging in it more often and therefore create a healthy and well-nourished species. One can assume that this entails that interactions involving food are generally more positive, and they'd certainly be correct. In a study conducted by Marie and Hetroth, a Dutch psychologist and neuroscientist, data showed that eating a meal while interacting with others is generally associated with a lesser display of hierarchy and more positive social interactions. In addition to the dopamine released while sharing the meal, the vulnerability of it also plays into the perception of the encounter. Consumption is a vulnerable action, and when two people are sharing this experience, it becomes intimate and brings the participants closer. What does this all have to do with diplomacy? Well, it explains the logic behind gastrodiplomacy and culinary diplomacy. Culinary diplomacy can be defined as the use of food and cuisine as instruments to create cross-cultural understanding in the hopes of improving interactions and cooperation. However, this definition applies to both culinary diplomacy and gastrodiplomacy. Both terms were coined in the early 2000s by public diplomacy scholars Paul Rockauer and Sam Chappell-Sokol. Although gastrodiplomacy refers more to public affairs of cultural exchange through food, while culinary diplomacy is more often associated with private affairs, both terms are generally used interchangeably. Despite the relatively recent coining of the terms, both are known as some of the oldest diplomatic instruments and have been utilized since the beginning of humanity.
El restaurante no ha cerrado las puertas desde 1725, entonces son 293 años los que llevamos aquí trabajando, continuamente sin cerrar.
Social dining, which dates back to ancient Greece, is a common practice used to bring people together. Aristocratic banquets would be held to discuss politics and philosophical matters, which would then be followed by a symposium, which were parties focused mainly on the consumption of wine. Evidence for these events can be found on Greek vases, ancient buildings where symposiums were held, and texts describing them. These dining events would lighten the mood, and often made people feel more comfortable around one another, which helped in the making of important decisions. As civilizations advanced, state banquets never faded, and led to many diplomatic events that formed bonds between countries. Even now, thousands of years later, food is still being used for this exact purpose. State dinners held by the United States leaders and state banquets held by the President of India are two common examples of this. Elements of diplomacy can also be found in cross-cultural exchanges of food and other culinary devices. Culinary diplomacy often involves meals between two or more heads of state in an effort to form bonds or tighten already established bonds.
In our international affairs, we continue to work together for peace.
These meals often introduce leaders to different aspects of each other's cultures and assist them in respecting their cultural differences. The first state dinner ever held in the United States was hosted by Ulysses S. Grant, who was accompanied by King David Kalakaua of Hawaii. This dinner paved the way for many future state dinners like the one held for Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa, or the one held for Leonid Brezhnev, the former leader of the Soviet Union. Since the first, over 320 state dinners have been held collectively by 17 presidents. This has helped establish diplomatic ties with over 97 countries. Some of these dinners included, or were shortly followed by, the signing of a variety of significant treaties, such as the North Atlantic Treaty or the Torrijos-Carter treaties. The United States, however, is not the only country in which culinary diplomacy is exercised. India, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom also follow these traditions in order to connect with other nations and sustain a diplomatic environment for everyone. Gastrodiplomacy, on the other hand, often involves the transfer of cultural cuisine from one region to another, generally in the form of restaurants, to form a positive public image of said region and in turn lead to cultural, social, and economic benefits. This form of food diplomacy is much more prevalent in daily life. Recently, there has been a notable increase in Southeast Asian restaurants populating major countries like the United States of America and the United Kingdom. And no, it's not simply because the food is good. The rise in these restaurants is actually due to countries like Thailand and South Korea creating gastrodiplomacy programs. By training chefs, giving out loans to those who want to open a restaurant abroad, rewarding successful and authentic restaurants, and studying the tastes of foreigners, these countries promote the expansion of their culture's food and in turn shine a positive light on their country. Global Thai and Global Hansik are two examples of programs that participate in these behaviors, and for the most part, their efforts have been successful. A study conducted by Braden Ruddy in 2014 found that 84% of respondents have considered traveling to a country on the basis of its national cuisine. As the study suggests, tourism rates in these countries have increased, which leads to a better economy, and in turn, a more advanced society. Other Southeast Asian countries like Japan, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Taiwan are also participating in this. But Southeast Asia is not the only region to spread its cultural influence through food. Australia, Sweden, and a variety of Nordic countries have followed this trend and are benefiting because of it. Foods that became popular on the basis of gastrodiplomacy include boba, ramen, sushi, kimchi, dumplings, kebabs, and many other mouthwatering flavors loved by many. Diplomacy involving food is often referred to as a soft power, which is an approach to international relations that utilizes convincing and persuasion instead of coercion, and typically involves economic or cultural matters. Because countries are sharing their regional food with each other instead of violently forcing each other to do what they want, they often gain more from using this type of soft power. According to a study conducted by the British Council from 2000 to 2012, the use of soft power, quote, boosts overseas student recruitment, tourism, and foreign investment. Although food has a subtle effect on diplomatic matters, in the long run, the impact made is a major one. Food is one of the oldest and most important diplomatic tools and will continue to be used for years to come. Whether cultural, social, or economic, gastrodiplomacy and culinary diplomacy can prove themselves undoubtedly effective.